Hi, welcome to Live with a Coaching Mindset, a podcast where we explore how leaders unlock followers' potential. I am Dr. Damian Goldvarg, and I am very excited to discuss my new book, Live with a Coaching Mindset.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Padilla. I'm also a coach, and I will be the host of this podcast. We hope that you find this space inspirational and thought provoking. Let's get into it.
Welcome to Lead with a Coaching Mindset. Today, with Elaine Padilla, we're going to be exploring the chapter 2 from my book, Lead with a Coaching Mindset. And in this book, we're going to be focusing on ethical leadership. In our last episode, we discussed some of the principles of ethical leadership, and today we're going to be covering ethical maturity. Elaine, how are you today?
Good, good. Glad to see you again, Damien, and glad to be here with everyone joining us today. Let's get into it.
And thank you for partnering with me in this
Yeah.
space so we can together reflect and bring some light about some of these issues related to leading with a coaching mindset. And one of the key elements of the key foundations of leaders demonstrating ethical behaviors is following ethical standards. And last time we discussed the difference between morality and ethics, and we said that morality is what is shared in society or what is shared by an organization or by a country or whatever is some code shared by a group of people compared to ethics that are more related to my individual decisions, my individual choices.
Yeah, I wonder how, if you're on a multinational or a multicultural team, how did ethics come into play? Like, how do you think about them?
Well, there is some standards that are shared by the whole organization. So, for example, every company has its own guidance, ethical principles, values, ways of working, and that make people to choose if they want to work for that organization or not. Like
Mhm.
in my book, I share an example where I had to work for a company that was a brewer, and I was wondering, how I will be. I was training people on preventing DUIs and the negatives of effect of alcohol and how to be responsible drinking. But at
Mhm.
the same time, we know many people die from DUIs and many people die because of excess of alcohol and how bad it's for the health. Today, I was hearing somebody talking that in where I live in California, it's one of the states in the country where there are more cases of DUIs. So I think that here, so I have an issue. Like I was teaching and I was bringing awareness and supporting people to be more responsible, but still was being paid by a brewing company. So I decided to quit. There was like a values conflict
Mhm.
for me personally in terms of what I think was right or wrong. So I think that this is another example. Some people may not choose to work with some companies that maybe have some values that they may not be aligned. And then when we work with people from different countries, different ethnic groups, we need to respect differences and we need to understand that people may have different ways of living and rules. We may or may not agree with them, but we need to be respectful and understand them and accommodate when it's possible to some extent.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. In your book, I just want to pivot. You cover ethical maturity. What is it, and what are those six components that you share in the book?
Yeah. Ethical maturity is about making decisions because ethics is about the decision that you make. And many times it's not white and black, it's gray. So when you have gray
Mhm.
area, what do you do when it's not very clear what to do? So
Yeah.
ethical maturity is your ability to make decisions based on your experience, based on your emotions, based on your intuition, based on logic, based on reasons, based on many different elements that help you to make the best possible decisions. But it's not only about making the decision, it's also about implementing it. You may have in your mind, make a decision, but then you don't do anything. Okay, well, it's not doing anything, it's at the end of doing something. So basically include the decision-making process, the implementation, explaining people why you have done what you have done, and finally living with it, being at peace with it, And the last one is learning from the experience. So all of these elements are part
Mhm.
of the ethical maturity. And we developed that over the years. And leaders need to apply ethical maturity when they need to make decisions. So
Mhm.
it's not only about information, it's not only about collecting information to make decisions. Sometimes we need to take into consideration the context.
Mhm.
Because if you follow only reasons and only logic, you may not pay attention to elements in the context that may be important to consider when you're making a decision. What is the level of empathy, compassion, also using your intuition is all of the information that you have. Maybe you are missing some information. And emotions are also a good indicator. If you don't feel good about a decision, something may be missing there. So emotions, not in the sense of, okay, I let my anger to make a decision that I may regret later. So it's about paying attention to the emotions and see how your emotions may be providing you with information that may be helpful when you need to make a decision.
I was curious about, ethical maturity and how it may differ in new managers versus seasoned managers, and also, age. Does that even come into play?
Well, we may say, if we talk about wisdom, the wisdom comes with experience. It's like if you have been there, you have done it, it is easier to make a decision when you have to make a decision that you have done it 20 times in your life.
Mm,
But when it's the first time that you need to make that decision, it's much more challenging because you're not sure is that the right decision. I may be wrong. I may regret that. So when you are younger and when you have less experience in any job, you may struggle more with the right decision compared to being more experienced. I have been there before, having to that many times, so you already know the experience. For example, about one of the most uncomfortable situations for leaders is laying off people, letting go of people.
yeah.
This is one of the things that people feel the most pain and it's more challenging and it's difficult. How do you make the decision? And there may be many elements. And sometimes in some organizations, it's seniority. The people who have been there the longer are protected compared to people who are new. But
Mhm.
sometimes that may not be fair because somebody new may be providing more value to the team than somebody who has been in the organization for a long time, who is not committed or doing their best. Or so, what is fair? Is what is the right criteria to make the decision? Or what organization need the most right now, based on the challenges that the organization is facing? What are the key skills that need from the team? And maybe the decision is based on that and not seniority. So there are many elements playing to make the decision. But then it's about being able to live with the decision. It's being able to say, okay, this is the decision, that was the reason why it was made, and being at peace with it. And that also takes learning. The more you do it, the more comfortable you are with making these kind of decisions.
Yeah.
And certainly not about laying off. Sometimes it's just firing somebody because they're not doing their jobs. That is even more difficult. Nobody likes that. Nobody likes to be there. But sometimes it's necessary.
Yes, and sometimes you can't show the reasons why the person's being let go. It might be obvious, may
Yeah.
not be obvious to others, but those who are making that decision are very clear as to why they need to do it. You were talking about like layoffs, and that's going on a lot right now across different organizations. And I'm just hearing about how it's done. Yeah, it's being done differently across whether they are unionized or not. And then what's the follow-up?
Yeah.
How do leaders, show up ethically in the aftermath, right? How can they demonstrate ethics afterwards?
This is a great question. And I think to the extent that leaders can be transparent, to the extent that leader can share information, they're able to. As you said, sometimes you may not be able to share some information,
Mhm.
but when you can share the information, do it. And when leaders are honest and vulnerable and they share how challenging it is for them, and they share whatever they can share. They don't think that people have a crystal ball and read their minds, because that does not happen. So they need to articulate to the extent that is possible what's going on and provide as much information as they can. And when people believe them that they have their best intentions in mind, they can be better prepared and readier to receive the news. Now, the issue is not only the people who are gone, but the people who stay. Because the people who stay are wondering, am I next? How can I trust this leader? So
Mhm.
again, it's about being able to articulate in language and to explain, to provide as much information as leaders can. And that's the best way to manage and navigate these challenging times.
Yeah, that resonates with me. At my organization, we had major layoffs, and the interim leader just the way he was showing up, very genuine and as transparent as he could be. It was really appreciated, despite him having to communicate, difficult news. So I'm not surprised that he was named now the permanent leader of our organization.
Mhm.
And I think people feel good about that because they were able to see how he navigated a very challenging time and how he showed up. So yeah, I think we're hopeful for the future.
That's
Yeah.
great to hear. Now, one key element of ethical maturity is self-awareness. Is knowing ourselves, is knowing our values, knowing what is important to us, and articulate that in language, letting people know about them. So, to the extent that we know ourselves and we are mindful about the consequence of our decisions,
Mhm.
we can be more effective leaders. So, I think that this is a key element. This is the foundation of ethical maturity. Is before we make a decision, before we implement the decision, before we let people know about it, are at peace with it, and learn from that. The foundation is knowing ourselves, understanding our values, and being consistent in our behaviors with them.
In your book, uh you provide some questions that people can ask themselves when they encounter an ethical dilemma.
Yeah.
T Tell us about those
Yeah.
questions, right? Even if they're guiding with values and just they have that self-awareness, but what are some good questions that they can ask?
I like these questions, and these I learned them from the ethics centers in Australia. Like when I was doing the research for my book,
Hmm.
and I was working on this chapter, I was thinking, okay, what interesting information I can find to share with the leaders that I'm working with that they can take advantage of and they can use. And there are 6 questions that I think they're pretty interesting. So the first question is, would I be happy if this decision appears in tomorrow news?
Mm,
How would I
yeah.
feel about that? And maybe uncomfortable, but we may feel happy because we know we have done the right thing. It's
Hmm.
about being confident with our decision. The second question is there any universal rule that applies for this case? So sometimes there are universal rules, sometimes they are not. So if they are, it's easier to think, okay, is there any rule that is universal? You were talking before, Elaine, working with people from different countries and cultures. And
Yeah.
so how do you deal with that? Sometimes there are rules that are not universal, but some they are, like not
Mhm.
lying, for example. Not lying. And it's interesting, how do we see that in media and in leadership? This line, like you see videos of things going on in the world, and then somebody say, no, this is not going on. And you saw it with your own eyes in the videos. And some of that, for example, now happening, we are in February 2026 because people are going to be watching this later.
Yeah.
And there were some events happening in the United States, in Minnesota, and some people were killed, and you see some of what's happening there, and then you hear something else. So that's a way to lose trust. And this is what I think is happening in the country to some extent. You lose trust of your leaders when you hear saying something and then you see something else. So there is no consistency between what people are saying and what you are seeing in recordings uh, in the news. Um, what if everyone did this? Is another question. What
Mm.
happens if other people would take the same decision that I did? Another question is, will the proposed action make the world a better place for everyone? That is a good question to look at. Okay, is this question, is this decision in some way making this a good world for everyone? And the last one, is this proposed action consistent with my values and principles? This is what we're talking about, the self-awareness one. And there is one that I was missing. What is the effect that this action will have on my reputation or the reputation of my organization?
Mm,
Because it's not only my reputation, it's the organization too. I remember once when I was a leader of the International Coaching Federation, there was a colleague of mine that I really care very much about. He's a
mm,
really good guy, nice person. We shared many moments, and he did a couple of things that were inappropriate. He mistreated somebody in his chapter, and it was decided that he needed to let go. And he was a friend. And I had to say
wow.
somebody who was a friend that his behavior was inappropriate. And that was not my decision, it was a decision of a committee. But I was part of the committee. And it was very uncomfortable, but I knew that it was the right thing.
Mhm.
And sometimes that is situations that may be uncomfortable and may have a consequence. Of course, we're not friends anymore. But that was the right thing to do. So you knew at the end is that we need to look at the bigger picture. It's not just my personal relationship. It's how what somebody have done affecting negatively others.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we wrap up today's episode, what are the takeaways for folks? What do you want them to remember?
I want to remember that when we need to make a decision, we pay attention not only to the information,
Hmm.
but also we pay attention to our experience. We also pay attention to our emotions. We pay attention to our intuition. If possible, we engage other people in decision making. Sometimes we don't need to make the decision alone. Sometimes we may engage other people, but sometimes it's not possible. So when it's not possible, we need to look at the consequences of our behaviors and know that it may be a perfect decision, but we do the best decision that we can make with all of this information. We're using logic, reasoning, emotions, intuition, paying attention to the context. And then when we make that decision, knowing that it may not be a perfect decision, we can live with it.
Yeah, good point.
And then we let go and we are on peace with it. And we wonder what we can learn from the experience. So
Yeah,
remembering that there is always a learning opportunity. What is a learning opportunity for me?
excellent. Thank you, Damien.
Thank you, Elaine. Great having the conversation with you again.
Yes, thank you. Bye, everyone. See you next time.
See you in our next episode.